Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about The Five Bloods. The Five Bloods has a lot going on in Spike Lee's very stream of consciousness, and I really actually like that about him. He's one of the few directors who can really do that with this kind of a film and do it as effectively. And sure, certainly he's not subtle in a lot of what he's doing. When people bring up a thing, they'll show a picture like it's a YouTube video, but it seems to work somehow, which I don't really exactly know how he does it, and other directors don't. But most Vietnam War films are from a white perspective. I think the most notable African American in a Vietnam film, other than Bubba from Forrest Gump, is Lawrence Fishburne in Apocalypse Now. But I think is the whole kind of crux of this movie. The basic sort of idea of what this film's about, the genre of what this film is about army guys going back and getting gold. And when you compare The Five Bloods to a film like Triple Frontier, another Netflix movie, sure, about guys who come back from the war and they're going to get gold. Now, when you have a bunch of white dudes who yeah, sure, the economy didn't work out that great. They're in suburbia, but they're in a lot of debt. I mean, financially, they could just figure some stuff out, I guess. But it doesn't really ring true to you because you're like, yeah, sure, you passed your prime. Sure, nobody really respects you, maybe, possibly, or something. But when you go into these treasure hunt movies with soldiers, it's sort of either they're really dour because of they're older and stuff, or they want to have fun again, or something like that. When you have African American soldiers who, they fought in pretty much every war, don't get that narrative told very much. They don't get very respected. They bring up all these guys who have fought in wars who we don't even know about. So when you take it from that perspective, those guys going in and getting gold and going on that treasure hunt has an extra meaning to it other than, these guys are old and, it'd be cool to have more money. It gives this an added sense of depth that this genre of movies, if it's a genre, I mean, it pretty much has never had. I always felt like these movies, as interesting, even though I try to meet these films sort of halfway, I always get bored of them. I think there was a Clint Eastwood one about World War II. A Triple Frontier, because that was in the last year or so, and I sort of kind of remember that, even though it's an insanely unmemorable movie. But, interestingly enough, this film was originally written to be an Oliver Stone film. It's written by 4 screenwriters, and I think in the credits, they kind of separate the 2 groups, because there's 2 guys who wrote it originally, which was Danny Bilson and Paul DeMeo, who wrote this as just soldiers going back. It was not written from an African American perspective. And then Spike Lee and his co-writer Kevin Wilmot, both won Oscars for adapting Black Klansman, took on the screenplay and changed the perspective of it. And what's interesting is, I don't think you'd look at this. The Spike Lee movies are mostly towards the genre of the auteurism of Spike Lee first. But even Inside Man, it's like a Dog Day Afternoon riff, and he still goes in different ways than those kind of movies do. He's not an assignment director. With this movie, you don't think of it that way. In fact, when I bring it up to people, they're often like, oh yeah, I don't like those movies. Nobody seems to like them. And I think the fact that people are talking about this shows what a real filmmaker, when they latch onto a genre, can infuse so much more energy and meaning into it. Because this genre meant absolutely fucking nothing until I saw this movie. It meant so little of nothing because no one could get it to work. And he, in a way, goes, what if you take that idea, right, and you put the best years of our lives into it, but you put best years of our lives with the actual meaning of it. And, I don't know, systematic racism also, which is pretty much the main thing with this. And he infuses all that within this film, and then suddenly you're like, holy fucking shit, you got this to work because you gave it meaning. Because for black soldiers to go back to Vietnam and get gold and make that war mean something, and especially when he adds on the idea that these guys went there during when Martin Luther King was shot. They missed out on a lot of the civil rights movement because they had to go over and fight this war for America to stop communism, when they got home they weren't going to get that same respect of the American dream that they helped theoretically protect, or how wasted that was. And it shows these guys, I mean, they are not only getting gold, by the way. Originally the screenplay wasn't just about gold, it was also about getting the remains of their fallen comrade, who is their squad leader, who in this film is played by Chadwick Boseman in flashbacks. That as well, I think, is interesting because he is almost the soul of the movie. Because, I mean, he is sort of just a soul in memories. He's a ghost. You only see him in the flashbacks, and he's played as a young man, whereas they, in the flashbacks, is just these older actors who came to Vietnam to, get his remains and return them to America and get this gold. That's interesting. I know that might also, they didn't do de-aging because Netflix didn't give Spike Lee a ton of money, which is a whole other issue, to be honest, but I think it actually narratively worked out a lot better because The Irishman bugged me a lot more than this movie did, and I think this movie is actually a lot better than The Irishman too. I think it's a more powerful statement, but it also works in the way that, like, this is their memories, and in memory you can play around with that, but also you sort of view yourself now in your shoes going back to that time. When you look at a picture of yourself from the past, you're often like surprised, that's what I look like. But if you think, like, you didn't not think about that time, you're thinking about how you look now, but you're like then, even though you know that was the past. You notice the actors in those sequences will not act like old men, they'll act like younger men, and those sequences are interesting. The Chadwick Boseman character is interesting because I think he represents what it felt like to be young in that war, but he also gave them sort of this sense of meaning. He would talk about civil rights and all those things, and you also think, like, what could he have done in America rather than leading these guys in Vietnam. And I like Chadwick Boseman because he's very charismatic and kind of reminds you of when you're younger, when you kind of follow a certain very charismatic person and what they mean. But I think he was charismatic in the right way, as he came up with the idea to even do the gold. He wanted that money to go to civil rights and help black people. And it's kind of interesting when you think about how what they're going back to get is to give meaning to something and to give something to the people who fought in this war that got virtually nothing out of it. And it didn't help them whatsoever. And it robbed them of an important time in history that they could have actually done something with. There's a very powerful scene, I think it's the scene most people talk about, when over a Vietnam radio stations mainly used to have propaganda to kind of upset the African American troops. They bring up, when Martin Luther King was shot. Hanoi Hannah, who would do these radio broadcasts and play like music and tell like news stories that would make them less believe in America. This was a real person, actually. She kind of informs them that Martin Luther King has been shot and how upset they are. In that moment, that was a big moment for America. That's a moment that none of us ever really forget. I wasn't alive then, but that's a moment in history no one forgets. And when they hear that and their anger there, and they're feeling that, like, why am I here? Why am I helping America do this when I should be, rebelling against this and what they did to Martin Luther King? That scene's kind of like shows you, they were really robbed of all these things, but what it has done to them, the guys who went over there and the amazing performances, the main group of guys are all named after the Temptations. The character that Chadwick Boseman plays, Zuster, actually written after the guy, I think, who produced and wrote a lot of the Temptations stuff. It's all older actors, not really big names. I did have people like Delroy Lindo, who does a great performance, is kind of a MAGA hat wearing soldier who's basically has a lot of anger about what happened over there and anger at America. And then Clark Peters, Norm Lewis, and Isaiah Whitlock Jr., two actors from The Wire. Norm Lewis is more of a Broadway guy. I was not familiar with him. I think everyone pretty much gives a good performance. I know Delroy Lindo is kind of the standout, I think, because of his anger and him talking directly to the camera and his frustration. And he's always been a really good actor. I know he was in Crooklyn. I feel like he's been in other Spike Lee stuff, and I can't remember right now. But he has a real presence to him, and you kind of have to have someone who's angry, and they should be angry. And he shows that so well. You see someone who was just chewed up and spit out by an American war, and what them keeping that trauma and their mental degradation. And his son, who's played by Jonathan Majors, who's also very good, shows up to make sure he doesn't kind of go off the deep end because they're concerned about him. Also, Isaiah Washington Jr. and Clark Peters, I thought, did really good performances. I think I like Clark Peters the most, really, but those four guys kind of steal the show in a way that I really like, because you don't really get to see films that are mainly done by actors who don't get to see enough, like films of this size with an auteur director, kind of almost character actors in a way. You never really get to see that, unfortunately. I don't love that. I like seeing good actors on screen. I was surprised a Spike Lee film of this size didn't have bigger stars in it, but I'm sort of glad it didn't after I was one, because I love all these actors. I love the two guys from The Wire a lot, and I was like happy to see them have like really great roles in this. The whole standout thing, I get that Delroy Lindo is great. They're all great in this. But I would say it's probably between Delroy Lindo and Clark Peters to me. I know Spike Lee has tried to make a big war epic that really meant something, and I don't know, Miracle Santa Ana I saw a long time ago and I don't remember. It seems like most people don't, unfortunately. I don't remember liking it that much, but this represents something. This tells a story that we're not really getting, not just giving it that importance because of that, although that is important, but him taking something that we've seen a million times, giving it fresh energy to it. Maybe this film is like 4 different movies at certain points. When I watch a Spike Lee movie, especially a modern one, I sort of just like watch where Spike Lee goes and just kind of go along with the ride. Not just like accepting it, but just like there's reasons he goes about what he's doing. Certainly this goes from a gold heist movie to like a Rambo action thing to this and to that. But it shows kind of like the anger that all these people had. You know, there's no like white American representation. I think Paul Walter Hauser, but it's not really about that. Him playing these like bomb detonating landmines and stuff, which is a weird plot line, but you're not getting that perspective on this war. You're getting like this perspective of the French, you're getting the perspective of the Vietnamese, who call this the American War, where capitalism has taken over Vietnam at this point. So, you know, it's almost like they should have, you know, it's almost like it won out eventually anyway. This anger that's gone on through all of them, and the idea that these perspectives are perspectives we're not getting enough of, and how that anger lingers and kind of festers and needs to go out some way. And that anger comes to these confrontations that it almost gives meaning to these. You know, I've heard people compare it to like Rambo at the end or something, but I think the first Rambo had, you know, a point to it. The other Rambos just become kind of Djangoistic propaganda, and I think in this it's showing like, you know, action and violence are angry and scary and upsetting and take people's lives away, and there's casualties, and you lose your friends, and you lose so much. The reason our great filmmakers and storytellers warn us against war is because it is scary, and war is hell and all those things. But when you really think of the human toll of like losing your best friends or fighting it out to the end to get this goal, to make this mean something, to make some sort of a change for the positive, means a lot more. And I think that's the real running thing through this is gold. You think of greed, and you think of they want to get their friend back to America, and that's certainly part of it. But I think that gold and why they want that gold and why they originally thought about getting that gold is not just because of selfish greed. It's also because what could they do with that gold to help change things, to help make right for the civil rights movement of the 60s and make right now. And that's why people fundraise, that's why people do GoFundMes, because they know they can make a difference with money. Because ultimately, what won Vietnam when they got there? When they see the Apocalypse Now banner behind a DJ, it's fucking capitalism. And if you can get capitalism to work for you, then maybe, just maybe, things will start to go your way. And if for a long time, and for the whole history of America and war, it hasn't, a way to get a slight sliver of that to work out for you makes this film kind of represent a lot more, that would try to sort of not right or wrong that a lot of these war films and Hollywood films and the happy ending really does, but try to hopefully not discount what had happened before, but to sort of make it a little better in the future. It makes what they're fighting for and what they're going for and the madness and the trauma and everything they're going through sort of make this quest impactful in a way that I've always loved about Spike Lee, because he never looks at an argument one way or the other. It's never, you know, it's never simplistic. It's always complicated and scary and has all this weight to it. And you know, even if you're making the right decision, you're hurting someone else. And it might not even feel like the right decision, but that's the complications of life in itself. But I think with them going after this gold and making capitalism work and making a war that was about capitalism try to be the capitalism of hopeful good is probably more of a deeply political message about war than those films that were like, war is bad, war is hell. It's sort of bringing up a whole theory about the whole process of war and what war does to the people, of the casualties and the kind of, the blood that oils the machine of war. It keeps the wheels of war turning and kind of calling it out and showing you that maybe we can do so much more with these kind of resources to kind of help us and help things maybe get a little better. And I think The Five Bloods has that going throughout it, and it sort of makes you reassess the kind of notion and the film idea of war is hell when you think about that, what that hell was really like and what they had to miss out on to go to that hell and what they had to change to be in that hell. So if you've seen The Five Bloods and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.